This is Susan B. Anthony, Chapter 2, The Smartest Woman in Canajoharie. I don't know what that is. Susan became an assistant teacher at Eunice Kenyon's Quaker boarding school in New Rochelle, New York. Teaching was one of the only jobs open to women at the time. Susan was happy to find work. She was not so sure she liked the idea of marriage. After her sister Guelma's engagement to Aaron McLean, the son of a local judge, Susan never heard from her. There were no more letters. It was as if her sister had disappeared. Susan wrote to Aaron with her fears. I have no loved sister to whom I can freely open all my heart and confide all my little griefs. Aaron's answer was not comforting. Sisters are always twice as much trouble and bother as they're worth, he wrote. Yeah, that wasn't very nice. For Aaron, this was just the normal joking of a man to his future sister-in-law. To Susan, it was not funny. Once Guelma was married, she would no longer be allowed to own anything or enter into any contract on her own. Her husband would have the final word in every important decision in her life. According to the law at that time, a wife had no right to divorce her husband. Susan couldn't see how this was much different than being a slave. Most women could not imagine any life other than being a wife and mother. When Susan's sister Hannah got married, Susan returned home to help with the wedding. Afterwards, she took a new job in Canajoharie, New York. Oh, it's a city. Susan lived with her uncle Joshua and later her cousin Margaret. Susan and Margaret became great friends. Susan's father was now doing better, so she no longer had to send money home. She bought a white silk hat and a gray fox muff to keep her hands warm. She even went to her first dance. She was leaving some of her Quaker ideas behind. Here she is. I assume it's with her cousin Margaret. See, this thing is called a muff, and it was made of fox, and when you put your hands inside, it kept them warm, like mittens. But she had not abandoned the Quaker ideas about temperance and slavery. She was much more interested in those political movements than she was in teaching. She loved it when her father came to visit. The two of them argued about abolition with the good old folks. That's what Susan called her relatives who still supported slavery. The good old folks call us crazy fanatics now. The day will come when they must acknowledge their stupidity, she said. On March 1st, 1849, Susan gave her first public speech. It was to 200 people at the Supper for the Daughters of Temperance, an organization of women working for an end to the use of alcoholic beverages, such as wine, beer, and whiskey. Temperance was not just about banning alcohol. It was about helping women married to men who drank too much. If a man spent the family money on alcohol or became violent, there was nothing a woman could do. Men were considered the head of the household. As such, they had all the power, even if their children were in danger. In her first speech, Susan made a special appeal to women. Who are to urge on this vast work of reform? Shall it not be women who are the most aggrieved? The next day it was said that Miss Anthony is the smartest woman who has ever been in Canajoharie. Susan's happiness over her speech was followed by great sorrow when her cousin Margaret suddenly died after having a baby. After Margaret's death, Susan returned home to her family's new house in Rochester, New York. It was often filled with her father's friends, political reformers, including Frederick Douglass, the ex-slave and great abolitionist. While home in Rochester, Susan learned about an unusual conference that had taken place in Seneca Falls, New York, in July 1848. The conference was for women's rights. The men and women there argued for such shocking ideas as greater legal rights for women, including women's suffrage, which meant the right to vote. I assume this is their new house in New York. Women even got up to speak at the conference in front of men. That was completely unheard of at the time. Susan had never thought about women fighting for their rights. Despite her Quaker education, she never thought about voting herself. She wanted to learn more about this women's rights convention. This is not Susan speaking, but it's somebody else speaking. This little piece at the end of the chapter is about Frederick Douglass. He was mentioned that he went to Susan B. Anthony's father's house. He was there. He is a very well-known man also. There are biographies about him. Frederick Douglass was born a slave in Maryland. He learned the alphabet with some help from the wife of his owner and learned how to read on his own. Later, he secretly taught other slaves to read as well. Back then, it was against the law for slaves to learn to read. Against the law, can you imagine? In 1838, he escaped on a train to Philadelphia dressed as a sailor with false papers that said he was free. At an anti-slavery lecture, he was asked to stand and speak. He was so good at it that people encouraged him to become a leader in the abolitionist movement. He published his autobiography. Remember, that's a story about himself. In 1845, it became a bestseller, even though some doubted that a black man could write so well. It's still read today as one of the best accounts of what slavery was really like. Douglass was the only African American to attend the first Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls in 1848. Kind of interesting. That, if you would like to hear a biography of Frederick Douglass, let me know. Chapter 3, New Friends.